I forgot. Brooke, how do you pronounce your last name?
Siem.
Seam. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to start this again then.
Well,
Okay,
you can do it.
just do it. Okay. Good morning, Sarah Hefla.
Good morning, Nancy Rommelman. Do you miss beefing with me on Twitter?
Well, I kind of didn't understand why you were like getting. Your question was, why do I care? I guess I cared because Pete Hegseth has already proven himself to be an unbelievable dum dum when it came to Signal. And now this is our Secretary of Defense. And now it's like, and you know what we're going to do? You know what we're going to do with your tax dollars to make you safe? We're going to rename battleships, including Harvey Milk, because. And I was like, I just thought it's just another dumb political move. But you came in and I guess schooled us.
Well, I don't know what I did. My point was, A, why do you care? Because there's like a million things exploding around us, and why choose this? B, what do the people on the ship want the ship to be called? That's really all I care about. And everyone keeps saying, but Pete Hegseth did this, and Harvey Milk was in the Navy, and well, this and that, and Jim Jones. And I'm like, I honestly really believe firmly that people that are in our military deserve to feel good about
Yeah.
the names of the ships that they're on. They deal with a lot of stuff. My brother's in the military. My brother was on a nuclear submarine. I actually emailed my brother to ask what he thought of this, but he is in Hawaii on his Naval Reserve week. So it is now like 2 a.m. there. And he probably won't get back to me. And, but I would guess if I were to channel my brother, he would say, yeah, we don't really want this ship to be called Harvey Milk. It's no big deal, but we don't have a relationship with him. He's not really an inspiring figure for your typical naval enlisted guy. And so I guess I never knew you to be super feisty about Harvey Milk
I'm
or the
not.
military or Pete Hegseth. So you're popping off before 8 a.m. with these feisty things about how Pete Hegseth is popping off. And I just wanted to know, what would you think if it was called USS Charlie's Angels? That's what I wanted to know.
All right, I'm going to just leave all that to the side because we got a guest today and nobody wants to hear this. But I will say that if it was the USS Charlie's Angels, I am fine with that, and I would imagine that the guys on the ship would be fine with that too.
I think
Right?
they'd love it.
So let's the USS Farrah Fawcett. So, Sarah, I mean, we could just go on about this all day, but I think we have other things to do today.
I know. We have a guest. I have an overlong introduction that I'd love to read. I met Brooke Siem maybe a year ago at a dinner with mutual friends, where I found her charming, smart, and foxy in a kind of 70s way. Because at least in my memory, Brooke, you were wearing like one of these hot denim jumpers. Could that be right?
100%.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Loved it. She'd written a 2022 memoir called May Cause Side Effects about growing up on antidepressants. One of the first generations of teens to have done so, but after 15 years, she wondered, who would I be without these psych meds? So she ditched the pills and she found out a lot about how and why and what we medicate. Her book is really good. It's charming and smart, just like Brooke, with insight about the sometimes harrowing withdrawal from antidepressants. And then there's this side story about her appearance on the food competition show Chopped.
Yes.
So I asked Brooke on the pod, and she agreed. And then I fell into a depression that I was pretty sure would require upping my own dosage of psycho-pharmaceuticals. Yes, I was taking a modest dose of sertraline, aka Zoloft, but even Nancy cautiously suggested I might want to talk to my doctor about increasing that amount. And I found myself confused about what I thought about this. Was I over medicating myself? Was it okay to over medicate myself if I needed to for a while? Months passed. Brooke was patient. Finally, I asked her to send a copy to Nancy, who then started texting me videos and notes about how much she loved the memoir. And so we booked Brooke on this show where all of this is being relayed to her for the very first time. Sorry about that. She is a chef for elite athletes, including Cincinnati Reds all-star Joey Votto, and San Francisco 49 All-Star Fred Warner, though she also speaks on antidepressant withdrawal. I think she might live in Nevada. Brooke Siem, welcome to Smoke 'em If You Got 'em.
Thank you. It was the best intro ever.
Aw, thank you. Well, so that is what helps explain some of the delay in our getting you booked. I suspect this is not the first time you've had dealings with somebody who felt a little bit corkscrewed at their own reaction to your story, which is really only your personal story. This is not a book that, to use a term, prescribes how anybody else should live. I didn't get that sense.
No.
But I wonder if we could go back and you could just tell us, how did you wind up on antidepressants?
I'm so glad you shared a little bit of your own story and opened up about this, because you really hit on a lot of the core tension, right? There's people who, we're in a world of bell curves. So there are a lot of people who read my work and listen to my work and whatnot who are fully on quote unquote my side, in the sense that they have also been harmed by psych drugs. Like me, they were maybe medicated as a kid. They had zero agency. Nobody was given informed consent, whether or not that's the child, the parent, whatever the situation was. And then a non-trivial amount of time goes by. We're talking years, right? In my case, it was
Right.
15 years. I was medicated when I was 15. My dad had just died. I was put on, we tried two psych drugs first. I think it was Prozac and Zoloft. And the reason why I think it was those two drugs is because they were approved for use in children and teens in the early
Mm.
2000s when I was medicated. But I didn't have a good reaction to them. And so I was
Yeah.
ultimately put on Effexor XR and Wellbutrin XL. At the same time, which
Ugh.
were not approved for use in children and teens, still aren't today, but I still, regardless, spent 15 years on these drugs, right? And I was medicated in the wake of my father's death. So, like, of course I was depressed, right? And we went from a double income to a single income. So, yeah, I was kind of anxious, right? Like, there was a lot going on at the time. And the solution and the thought was to medicate me. And there are a lot of people who end up in this situation where they're given these drugs for a variety of reasons, and especially if they're a kid, and you just don't question it, because we're not taught to question it. And we're taught to think that the doctors know everything. And so was my mother. And so it's all well and good until you don't realize you've made a very subtle shift. And then 15 years go by and you are so far off course, right? So there are a lot of people who get that story. And then there are a lot of people who are where I used to be, which is really buying into this idea, this perceived reality that there is a chemical imbalance, that there is something wrong with me, that this is a disease I am not responsible for, that it's genetic, that it runs in my family, that it's this powerlessness place. And oh, the drugs help me with that. And for a lot of people, they find relief in the fact that the drugs numb you out. That's what they do. They're not solving any problems here. They are not solving an underlying chemical imbalance. There's no way to test for that, no way to prove it. It's never been
Yeah.
proven. They are numbing you, which in a lot of situations makes people feel better, because it feels better to the alternative to whatever they were experiencing. So the perception and the narrative is that these drugs work, right? There are a lot of people there. Then there are a lot of people in the middle who are like, well, they were helping me and now they're not, and I'm stuck on them. Or I've tried what I think is everything else and this seems to be the last stop. What do I do? And then there's a lot of confusion in that place. And I find that place to be really interesting,
Yeah.
actually, more interesting than either of the polarities.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of sobriety too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, all the things that you say about pharmaceuticals could also be said about drinking,
Yeah.
and some of the numbness and the problems um are similar, and I also find people to be like super polarized, and
Yeah.
then most people are just kind of in the middle being like, I might drink too much, but I really like drinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. And it works until it doesn't, right? And so that's
Right.
kind of what I usually, I mean, if I even engage with people, because if there tends to be too much volume of responses for me to engage with. But if I'm actually having a legitimate conversation with people, very often that middle ground, it's like, and also the one where people are just so full pro drug, it's like, just wait. right? Because we're all going to transform and grow. And in my experience, I don't meet a lot of people who've been on these drugs for years who are doing well by their own definition. They all just end up scraping by or they start doing worse. And I don't say that in some sort of critical way. I think, like I said, what happens is you get shifted on this little compass. You get shifted 1 or 2 degrees. You don't notice the difference in the beginning, but
Yeah.
the difference really tends to expand the further down the road you get there. And then people tend to get to a point where either the side effects of being on these drugs are outweighing whatever benefit they're perceiving, or it's legitimately starting to physically harm them in a way they can't ignore, or their life changes. Maybe they want to get pregnant or something, and they start to look at all this,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then they're stuck. And that's where it's like, okay, now we can talk because the situation has changed.
Now, we know in the book that when you decided you wanted to maybe taper back and, eventually perhaps go off of these drugs, your initial experience in New York, where the doctor you found, who's a very strange character. I love the part where she's kind of like kneeling by your knee in the waiting room. It's like,
Oh
excuse
yeah, yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah.
that happened.
Who was not only kind of gave you bad advice in terms of like how to go off, but was sort of dismissive, like, well, you've got to take these things. That's it. Like, you have to do it. And then it's like, well, yeah, but what if I don't want to? Well, I mean, very dismissive of your desire to get off. In your experience, is this sort of the way of the world with these medications?
This is so common. This is probably the single most common report I get back from people is some variation of I talked to my doctor about this and they either wanted to up my dose, change my drug, or talk me out of it. And that's where we're at. I mean, like, I'm starting to hear more stories of people who are like, I'm working with someone supportive or whatnot. I think that that is the direction we're going to go, but we have not yet hit critical mass yet with that. But the bottom line is that most of these prescribers have been, God, I mean, I hate using the word brainwash, but that's what's happening from day one of medical school, that this is a chemical problem that's solved by pharmaceuticals. And it's because the pharmaceutical companies have come in and financially supported the medical schools. They are literally walking into doctors' offices with pill packs and samples. And back in the day, like, we've got a lot of doctors now, who've been practicing for 20, 30 years. They were existing before sunshine laws existed. So they're literally getting kickbacks, like financial kickbacks. I mean, it's just this whole system has been built in a way that when you walk into a doctor's office and you say, I'm sad, they say, here's a pill. Like, it's been calculated and strategized.
I have a mother who is a therapist. She's a licensed medical social worker. So that's where her training lies. All through the 90s, if you went to the Hepala house and you wanted to use like a post-it note or a
Yeah.
pen, you would use a Prozac or Wellbutrin or Zoloft branded item because they were being given out in
Yeah.
her office so frequently. When I got to college and was a little bit unsure what I was going to do for a living because I wanted to be a writer, but we could all agree that was sort of an unrealistic path, she said, well, why don't you become one of these pharmaceutical reps? They show up to my office. They're all very young and pretty. They have, and you have to understand, my mom, I mean, like, none of us thought this was a
Mhm.
bad thing. We
No.
thought, oh, well, this is really nice. These nice, pretty young women come to this family therapy office and hand out free samples of their wares. How lovely.
Mhm.
And this is all later satirized in. Did you ever see that movie Love and Other Drugs or something like that?
No.
It's about Viagra, but it's about the pharmaceutical industry and it's really interesting. But, you know, what happened? We've had much deeper dives and more time to think about what happened. There have been Pulitzer Prize winning books like, I think Dreamland is the name of the book, that talks about the OxyContin, sort of
Mhm.
how that seed was planted and then how it kind of overgrew. And I think what we should maybe point out is that something very similar happened with psychopharmaceuticals.
100%.
Yeah, I
And
remember.
I mean, it's all drugs, really. We're selling to the symptoms here, not so.
Right.
So I reviewed Dreamland for the journal, and part of the shocking thing is the amount of pharmaceutical reps that are just walking in and saying, "Oh, take this, OxyContin. It's great. Your patients are going to love it."
Yeah.
Yeah, they did love it, and it became a problem. Did that did that follow? Because this was kind of the '90s. Did that follow in the wake of these sort of meds that you're talking about? Was that more like the eight when, or were they running in tandem?
It was all roughly happening at the same time, but it may not have had the spotlight on it all at the same time. For example, like when Prozac came out, Prozac was, I believe, it came onto the market, I think, in early 1988, like January 1988. I may be plus or minus a few months here. But then it was approved in like late 87. And right at the same time, they started doing something called a DART campaign. So the DART campaign was aimed to bring awareness to depression as a debilitating symptom or as a debilitating disease. It was the point of the DART campaign was to alert the everyone in the United States that, oh, depression is wildly undertreated and we must make everyone aware of it, right? So it was this big like governmental push, and what happened was is they pharmaceutical companies came in and spent millions and millions of dollars on the advertisements for the pamphlets and the doctor education. And what's fascinating is they don't just focus on the doctors and the prescribers. A lot of the education was focused on social workers and
Yeah.
psychologists and people who could not prescribe, because the whole point is that they wanted, because oh, by the way, we have this new drug that's coming out that's going to solve all this, right? So this is a coordinated effort. But the point is that, like, you think to yourself, well, why would the pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money educating psychologists and social workers who can't prescribe? Oh, it's because if someone doesn't get themselves to a psychiatrist or a prescribing doctor, you're going to go to your local, school counselor. And the school counselor is going to be like, well, I just learned about this new drug called Prozac, and it sounds like you have depression, and I took a weekend course, and here's the checklist. So maybe talk to your doctor about this. And then it's a sales funnel. That's all it is. And that started off in the late 80s going into the early 90s with Prozac. It provided this very clear blueprint for how to sell something that we can't test, right? Like, tell me how many depression molecules per million are in your blood, right? Like, there's no test for this, right? It's just a collection of symptoms. So that's where it started. And Prozac took off like gangbusters, and then it started making so much money. And then the next thing you know, you have Zoloft doing that. And then the laws change under Bill Clinton about being able to advertise to the public and via TV, and everything just coalesces at once. And the difference between antidepressants, I think, and opioids and whatnot is that there was that big debate with like RFK back in February about like people got all upset about saying, oh, antidepressants aren't addictive and it's not like getting off heroin, right? Like, people really twist this addiction narrative, right? Because it's not as visibly destructive as heroin, alcohol, or whatever for people who are quote unquote addicted to that, right? But antidepressants cause a physical dependence. So the destruction and the way it hurts your body, it happens much more slowly and insidiously over time. And so it's not as socially uncomfortable for people. So I think we
That's
don't
right.
like to we don't like to lump it into the same group of people who are on the street, right? We think that's different. It's just a different variation. We usually like to delineate it between addiction and dependence. But that all started happening in the 90s, right? And so we change the narrative of the culture. We dump all these drugs onto the doctors themselves. We ignore the fact that they create a physical dependence. Then here we are, what are we, 20 years later, 30 years later? We now have decades of anecdotal evidence of millions and millions of people being on these drugs all over the world, tens of millions. All of our mental health rates have gone up. All of our suicide rates have gone up. People are on multiple drugs. We can't get off of these drugs. Like this isn't coincidence. Something has happened here. And I think we're starting to wake up a little bit and to understand that, oh, these drugs long term actually enhance and induce the problems they were originally marketed to.
And there's so many sort of underreported side effects of
Mhm.
SSRI.
Yeah.
One of the early ones that became I became aware of was that women didn't want to have sex on them.
Oh yeah. Okay. So you're kind of going into the world of like sexual side effects, PSSD, which is called post SSRI sexual dysfunction. And PSSD, the name of it is a little bit more. It's a little bit more narrow than the condition actually is. I mean, it can really just be better explained by a change in your sexual interest or functioning desire or even ability, right? And it's not just SSRIs, it can also be SNRIs or NDRIs, the other classes of antidepressants. But it's a little bit, we don't really know why it happens, but I mean, these drugs are given to men who have premature ejaculation problems, right? So
Right.
like
Right.
that's
And this
what
as a way to help, in
yes,
other
as a way
words.
to help because it literally delays your
It
orgasm
delays.
or stops it. And also for a lot of people, but like again, we have to look at the spectrum of what that can be. So I was medicated when I was 15. I was right at the start of puberty. I completely came of age and went through puberty on these drugs. And I remember feeling like I must be asexual at some point in my like teens and early 20s because I was like, I'm not attracted to anyone or anything. I have no desire to have sex. I like don't even feel like I know how to flirt. All those butterflies you get in middle school evaporated, right? Had none of that. And
Mm.
I was really distraught by this for a while, thinking that like this was me because again, nobody had my goddamn child psychiatrist wasn't talking about sexual side effects when I was 15, and he certainly wasn't
Mm.
talking about it to my mother. Nobody was
Mm.
thinking like how this is affecting the whole body. And so I pretty much, if you look at my relationship history and whatnot, I did not have my first unmedicated relationship of any until I was 31. I did not have my first orgasm with a partner until I was over 30. Okay. And off the drugs. None of that happened while I was medicated. And I thought it was my problem. Then I had to spend 5 years in a relationship unraveling that and like learning,
Yeah.
oh, like this was done to me. This isn't me. And to
Mm.
do that in your 30s when you're supposed to be thinking like, okay, is this the person I want to spend the rest of my life with? Do we want to have kids,
Sure.
get married? Like, and then, I ended that relationship in part because I was like, I can't commit to someone when you're the only person I've ever had a meaningful relationship with off these drugs. I need to go,
Mm.
out and explore. And he was devastated by that, right?
Mm.
But it's because I didn't get a chance to do that from 15 to 30. And you know what? I recovered. I worked through all that. And now I can have a much more healthy sexual relationship with my partner. But many people can't. Many people are chemically castrated for life or are busy having like sexual, like questioning their sexual identity and their desire and who they're attracted to for life. It doesn't just diminish your ability to have an orgasm, it diminishes your ability to connect with people on any level. And like you can't measure this shit in a lab. So when people start going off about the science and like randomized control trials, I'm like, tell me, how are we going to measure this? And like, how are we going to measure the societal impact of this? We can't. And we have to be able to have broader conversations when we're talking about things that affect people on a psychological, emotional, and spiritual level, because it's
Well,
not just about biology.